Redrock is the single hardest test within McKinsey Solve. Charts are everywhere. Half of the test is math. There's weighted average, probabilities, statistics, all the stuff we hated in college. McKinsey doesn't even try to hide that you must study in advance. Today I'll give you an overview of the test, walk you through both parts of it, and give you a few tips on how you can effectively prepare. Let's start with a quick overview. The Redrock Study Task is the second test that you'd have in Solve, which is the current name for McKinsey's gamified pre-screening test. Within the Solve test, Redrock deployed after ecosystem building as a staple for nearly every McKinsey applicant, replacing plant defense. If you apply in 2024, the chance of you getting this is at least 95%, because I haven't heard about plant defense for quite a while now. It places you within the context of a research team of biologists and conservationists on an island called Redrock. Your job in the Redrock test is to help this research team by collecting data, performing calculations and basic analysis, writing reports, and creating visualizations. If you have seen my videos on what a consultant does for a living, you may realize that such a test is pretty much a simulation of the consultant's job, minus the fun client-facing parts. Each Redrock test is divided into two parts, called the study and the cases. Each part contains 6 to 10 smaller questions, or 12 to 20 in total. These days, it tends to lean towards the lower end of this spectrum, so I'm going to pick 14 as the average number of questions. You have 35 minutes to complete those 14 questions, which translates to 2.5 minutes per question. You are free to allocate time for each question and each part of the test, as long as you finish everything in 35 minutes. On the surface, that sounds like a lot, but that's before you take into account the stress involved with taking such a high-stake test, the need to save time just in case you get unexpectedly hard questions towards the end, as well as an unfamiliar interface. So on the test day, a lot of my customers report feeling hard-pressed for time and ended up making rushed submissions. Another element that increases the difficulty and complicates the time limit issue of the Redrock test is the way you proceed through the questions. On one hand, you must submit the answer to one question before you can even see the next one. As a result, you don't really know how much work is left ahead of you. Maybe there's a long reading question, maybe there's an unexpectedly hard math question, you don't really know. This incentivizes you to do the current question as fast as possible. On the other hand, you cannot go back to review the previous parts once you've submitted the answer. I mean, you can't even see those parts, let alone editing your answer. And in the rare exceptions where you can go back and redo things, only the first try counts. This forces you to be careful, which directly contradicts the incentive to go fast. This creates a kind of dilemma for candidates. Success in the Redrock test relies on balancing between these two contradicting needs or incentives. Also, unlike the games we had previously in Solve, such as ecosystem and plant defense, Redrock actually requires you to learn things in advance. You have to be good with numbers because at least half the test is math, even things like probabilities and basic statistics. You also need to learn about charts and tables, when to use what and how to read them quickly, because nearly every question comes with at least one chart of table. You must be able to read quickly and accurately, because there will be a lot of written information, especially at the start of the test. All of it means you just have to practice. I don't know why McKinsey keeps saying you don't need to prepare anything, when they explicitly ask for background knowledge like this. As for the interface, if you know how it works in advance, that's one less issue to worry about when the day comes. So what do we have for today's video? As I said at the beginning, I will use a mock test and walk you through Redrock from beginning to end. The mock test is part of our simulation. You can try it out for free once it's available, using the link in the description. I will use the first part of the test, called the study, to explain how the interface works, and the second part, which is the cases, to explain the question types. That said, the insights are going to be applicable for the whole Redrock test, not just any specific part. After the walkthrough, I'll wrap it up with some of the common concerns regarding the test, such as recommended preparation time, where to find the necessary materials, how to manage time in the real test, etc. Here's the interface of the Redrock Study Task, or actually our simulation of it. You can try it out for free using the link in the description. The real Redrock test looks roughly like this, but it has more quality of life features, fancy 3D animation, plus untimed tutorials as well to get you up to speed. The time bar can be seen on the top of the screen here, and every few minutes they'll tell you how much time you have left. If there's a pause symbol, that means the current part you're in is untimed, for example, the training questions. Going to the left side of the top bar, you can see two tabs, Study and Cases. These represent the two parts I talked about earlier. The study is in turn divided into 3 smaller stages: investigation, analysis, summary. You can see them presented as tabs on the sidebar here. You'll see these directions at every stage and every question. These contain important technical instructions telling you what you need to do, things like drag only the relevant data or round results to 2 decimals, so don't neglect them. The first stage we're seeing right now is investigation, which is mainly about data collection. To be more specific, you need to find out the correct formula and collect the necessary data. It's effectively 2 questions grouped into 1. On the left sidebar, we see what looks like 4 questions, but luckily they are just headings of 1 really long page, so you are free to move back and forth between them. However, you can see that I cannot open analysis and summary, so I can't know for sure how much work I need to do there. Moving into the middle part of the screen, we see that it starts with directions. Here in investigation, they tell you to collect only the relevant data into some kind of journal, which means if you collect irrelevant data, it will count against you. Right after directions, we have objectives. The objectives are for the whole study and it's content-focused, that is, a question you are supposed to answer. It's like a case prompt in case interviews. Objectives are also quite specific, enough so that just by reading them you can already guess with reasonable accuracy what you'll need to collect for this stage. For example, looking at this objective here, I already know that I need the targets for these pirate ships as well as their performance this year. You can also see that this objective is highlighted like a button. This is what I call a collectible piece of data. In Redrock, all of the data you need to complete the study will be collectible, so this is where you focus your attention. That said, not all collectible data will be necessary to complete the study, so don't go collect everything. That's one way to get yourself a rejection letter very quickly. And because the objective informs us what we need to do throughout this study, I will collect it and place it on the top of my journal. To collect a data point, you pick them up with your cursor, drag them around, and drop them into this research journal on the right-hand side. This research journal basically works like a better on-screen version of your notes, by allowing you to carry the important data over to the later stages of the study. In fact, it's just way better than old-school pen and paper. That said, you should have a pen and paper plus a handheld calculator by your side anyway, just in case. After these data points are moved into the journal, you can also modify their label so it's easier for you to recognize which is which. You don't have to modify these labels just for the sake of it. Do it only in cases where it is hard for you to differentiate collected data points. You can also rearrange the collected data so it's easier for you to work with, dragging it up and down within the journal using your cursor. Each data point also comes with a description, which you can see if you click on this arrow on the right side of the data point. You can read the full version of text-based data, or can use this to differentiate number-based data without having to rely on labels. I'm going to keep these descriptions open so I can easily read, differentiate, and use them as I go through the study. Coming right after the objective is this study information, which is always a wall of text. It used to have even more text than what I'm showing, about 400-500 words, but now it's trimmed down to around 200-300. The study information contains a lot of background information, which would give you a general understanding of what the case is about. I say you should always skim through this, don't ignore it. It takes no more than a few seconds, and it might help you down the road. Now when you look closer, some of them describe math formulas, and they very explicitly tell you which numbers you need, like the collectible bullet points here. You need them to construct formulas necessary to answer the questions in the analysis stage as well, so they are definitely going into the journal. Also, there's one highlighted number just above them, 20, and that's the target performance for each ship. So even though it's not mentioned in the bullet points underneath, we're also moving it into the journal. Moving down, you will see exhibits, that is tables and/or charts. So this is where you get the numbers to fill in the formulas and answer the objectives. There tend to be somewhere around 20 to 30 data points split between 1 to 3 exhibits. More exhibits means fewer data points on each, and vice versa. For example, in the mock test I'm showing here there are 2 tables, with 12 data points on each, making a total of 24 data points. Now if we look at the data we collected, we know that we need data from 2 ships only, the Peasant Fortune and the Boring Galley. We also only need the data on capture attempts, as well as the numbers of black flag and red flag captures for each of those ships. So those are the things I'm going to move into my journal. Failed attempts, potential targets, and close-in attempts are not concerned in this study, so I'm not collecting them. Once you have done collecting, as well as rearranging and renaming the data if necessary, you can submit the results to unlock the next phase, which is analysis. It's generally agreed that only the first submission counts, so try to be correct on your first try. The next part, called analysis, is all about math. Here you're supposed to use the collected data from investigation to formulate and calculate the necessary numbers to answer the objective. And because every analysis question here derives only from the objective and the formula descriptions, if you've done your investigation right, you should have all the data you need to go through every single question. That said, if you did forget to collect a key piece of data, you could still go back to investigation. This is the first exception to the not one step back rule. Another thing to keep in mind with analysis questions is that some of them are dependent on previous answers, so you might end up with a nasty chain of wrong answers if you're not careful. Always double check before you submit. Let's try doing the first question, the expected number of capture attempts for each pirate ship this year. This is fairly straightforward, since we know the number of attempts for each ship last year, and also that they will go up by 25% this year. Technically, you can figure this all out on a piece of paper and handheld calculator, but that's not necessary, because in this analysis stage, you also get this on-screen calculator, this thing on the right side of the screen next to the journal. This calculator is very basic. You can see here that it contains only the button for 4 basic operations: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division, but that's all you ever need for Redrock. And interface-wise, you will see that it's so much better than using handheld calculators or spreadsheets. You can type on this calculator using your cursor, but that's quite clunky and slow, so don't use them in the real test. Or you can just type on your physical keyboard. This is my preferred way of doing it unless I'm dealing with really large numbers. For example, 1 million or long decimals, like 3.141592. In those cases, I'd use the third option, which is to drag the correct number from the journal to avoid typos or what I call rounding creep, where if you round too many times consecutively, you end up with a final result that's significantly off from the correct one. After you typed in or put in the numbers and made the calculation, the calculator logs your calculation and results on its screen, from which you can either drag the number onto the input space for the next calculation or onto this answer blank over to the left. By the way, for some reason, likely something technical, McKinsey does not allow candidates to type in the answer blanks here. Please let me know in the comment section if this has changed. When you have put in all the answers and double-checked them all carefully, you can submit to go to the next question. Also, at this moment, the test platform will automatically log the results into your journal for later use, so you don't have to worry about collecting the results yourself. Now that we're in the second question, you can clearly see the cruelty of the not one step back rule. I am not allowed to open question 1 again. For this question 2, we have to calculate the expected chances of black flag and red flag captures. We have enough data to calculate the current chances of each outcome, and we know how much they will change this year, so we do it like the first question. Also for this question, I want you to look at the unit being used, which is percent, and which differs from percentage point. Both terms are present in Redrock, so it's important to tell them apart. For example, if you want to increase an original chance of 20% by 20%, you multiply the original with 1.2 and end up with a new chance of 24%. But if you increase it by 20 percentage points, well, you just add it straight on top and get a new chance of 40%. Before I submit, I realize the question demands us to express the result in percent, but I used decimals in my original calculations. I'm going to multiply the result by 100. Going to the third question, we now have to use the answers from the previous questions, meaning if you got any of the 2 previous questions wrong, it will come back to bite you right here. Also, you can see that this time I'm dragging data from the journal instead of typing to preserve all the decimals from the original answers, and the final question is just a simple addition. Not much to talk about here. Once you've done all the questions, you proceed to a tab called Review. This is your last chance to review both investigation and the answers you've got from analysis. You cannot go back to the analysis questions, but you can still check if you get the right answer by going back to the investigation stage and using the on-screen calculator. The journal is still available for you to collect any data that you might have missed. You should also use this part to arrange and label your collected data if necessary. For example here, I'm going to rename the labels for the answers of the previous questions. If you're confident you've got everything right and/or fixed any error, you can now proceed to the final stage of the study called Summary. The final stage in investigation is Summary. This is where you compile the answers from the previous stages, making it the easiest among the 3 phases. When you've got to report, you will be locked out of investigation and analysis, leaving you with almost no chance to correct your past mistakes. This summary stage consists of 3 questions or sub-stages called Report, Graph Selection, and Visualization. In report, the test gives you a few paragraphs that, if completed, would answer your original objectives. This part is pretty straightforward, as your job is simply to drag numbers onto the blanks and choose the right conclusions. Also notice the difference in the answer blanks, which now have the numbers 1, 2, 3 written on them. This signals that they accept manual input. That is, you can type in your answers, which is faster if you remember them, and allows you to correct yourself should you realize a mistake. Now, because I remember that last year, each of these pirate ships captured 15 ships, I'm just going to type them in, no need to drag anything. For the numbers of this year, though, I remember that they have a lot of decimals, so I'm going to drag them from the journal. Once you're done, you click Submit, and remember to double check because you will not be able to return and fix anything. On to graph selection, you are asked to choose a suitable type of chart for a certain analysis. For now, this is the first question in Redrock, where you are explicitly required to possess background knowledge. Specifically, it requires you to know which chart types are suitable for which purposes. The directions tend to be specific enough for us to quickly figure out the correct options, as long as we know the basics. For this mock test, I'm seeing that the directions tell me to compare distinct variables, so I'm going to use the bar chart. Finally, in visualization, you will drag and drop numbers from the journal onto the chart you have chosen in graph selection to finalize the report. This part is also very easy. It's like the report stage, except now, instead of paragraphs, you are supposed to fill in exhibits. Also, if you realize that you got the wrong chart type, you can still go back to graph selection and choose it again. This is the second and last exception to the not one step back rule. So here I'm going to place the numbers and complete the study. After part 1, we move on to part 2, which is called cases. Each of these cases is similar to one part or task of the study. For example, half of them look a lot like the questions in analysis, while others are almost carbon copies of graph selection, and still others are just miniaturized versions of the investigations. The distribution of question types is about the same as for the study as well. Even the tools are the same. If you have to do math, they will give you the calculator. If you need to collect data, you have the research journal. In this part, you are given 6 to 10 of these cases. It seems to be mostly 6 recently. That is the start of 2024, but just October last year it was 10. This mock test follows the most recent insights, so it has 6 questions. The flow of part 2 is like part 1. You have to solve cases in sequence, and there's no going back once you have submitted your answers. You are not allowed to carry over data from one case to the next, but luckily, each case is self-contained. It has all the information you need, meaning you don't have to worry about making consecutive mistakes because you make one at the first case. Now let's take a quick look at the interface of a case. Each case starts with its own directions, which tells you what you are supposed to do in that case, while also giving you the necessary background information, which is about 3,100 words long. If you compare this with the investigation stage of the study, this is like directions, objective, and study information combined. Around the middle, there's the exhibit. Each case often comes with 1 to 2 exhibits, which together contains anywhere from 5 to 20 data points. Some cases have no exhibit at all. At the end of the case is one question and its corresponding answer section. Some cases, however, can have up to 2 or 3 sub-questions, which you can answer in whatever order you want. These sub-questions tend to, but not always, rely on the same formula. Like with the report stage, you can manually type in your answers. Let's dive in and solve these cases, shall we? Case 1 contains a calculation question, the single most popular question type in Redrock. Half of the questions from the cases and all the questions from analysis belong to this type, so that's roughly half of all Redrock questions. As for format, this question belongs to the fill-in-the-blanks type, so you need to find the accurate result and type it in there. The type of calculation shown in this case is the weighted average. So we take each possible repair cost, multiply them with their respective weight, or in this case, chance, sum up the results, and divide that sum with the sum of all weights, which in this case is just 1 or 100%. The correct result should be 1.37. Okay, submit. The next case contains another calculation question, this time a multiple choice one. Now, in Redrock, multiple choice questions tend to have all the options being almost correct and or really close together, so it's not going to be a simple guessing game. You can see that this particular question relies on knowing a few basics about probabilities. These probability questions in Redrock tend to be the basic types, namely intersection of events, union of 2 events, and complements. Or in plain English, the chance of many things happening at the same time, the chance of at least one in many things happening, and the chance of the opposite thing happening. We'll add more contents on this in our simulation over time, but for now, I'll put a link in the description to sites that I think explain this pretty well. Back to the question, I'm going to use the union of two events formula for this one, so I'll sum up the chances of each of these two islands having a treasure, then minus the chance of both islands having treasures at the same time. The answer should be 55. If you look at the options, the third and fourth can be ruled out quickly, just with common sense, but the first one is not. If you forget to subtract the chance of both islands having treasures, which is by no means an intuitive thing to do, you end up with this option. Moving on to case 3, we see a fairly daunting chart and 3 sub-questions that explicitly require you to know basic statistics. If you don't know these terms in advance, you will have to Google them on the spot, and that's going to take a lot of valuable time. Another interesting feature here is that even though it looks like you have to calculate, they don't give you a calculator. That's because this is a reading question, which focuses on testing your ability to read large amounts of data and identify key information. The data itself can be given in text format, in tables, or in charts, depending on each question. If that sounds familiar, yes, the investigation stage in part 1 is effectively a really big reading question. It also contains another question type, which we'd come to in a moment. The report task is also another reading question because you just need to read and match the blanks with the data you already collected. Sometimes you have to calculate things in Redrock's reading questions, but those tend to lean on the simple side, so not the kind you'd see in math questions. Now, back to this question. Let's first figure out how to read this chart. This is a histogram, and it shows distribution of values in a data set. On the horizontal axis, we have the recorded values, in this case, the number of ships spotted on a given day, and on the vertical axis, we have frequency, in this case, the number of days on which a given number of ships was spotted. I'm hovering the cursor on the first column, which says 0 ships and 5 days, meaning there are 5 days on which this Landing Dutchman pirate ship spotted or saw no other ships. Then we dive into the questions. The first question asks for the median of this data set. The median is the middle number if all values in the set are arranged in an ascending order. If there are an even number of values, then the median is the 2 middle values summed up and divided by 2. In this case, we have 90 values in total, from the 90 days, so I'm going to find the 45th and 46th values, add them up and divide by 2. With a histogram, the values are already neatly arranged from lowest to highest, so what I'll do is hover my cursor on these columns, go from left to right, and mentally add up the frequencies until I'm past the 45th and 46th. Here I go. The first column is 5, the second column is 6, that makes 11 values, then 8, that makes 19 values, another 9, so 28 in total, another 15, that makes 43, then 13, that's 56 values at this point, and we're past the 46th value. Now, if we look at the horizontal axis, then the 45th and 46th should both be 5, so the median is 5 as well. So the correct option is larger than 4. The second question asks for the mode of this data set. Mode is the value with the highest frequency. There can be multiple modes if they share the same frequency. If all the values have the same frequency, then there is no mode. To answer this question, we just need to look for the highest column in the histogram, which says 4 on the horizontal axis, so the mode is 4. So the correct option is equals 4. The third and final question asks for the meaning. This is the sum of all values divided by the number of values, or in plain English, the average. Technically speaking, mean, mode, and median are 3 types of average, but that's, well, technically speaking. Anyhow, you can do this with a calculator, but in this particular case, there's a quicker way. You can see that we have 3 options: larger than 4, equals 4, and smaller than 4. Now, if we look at the histogram, there are more and higher columns on the right side of the 4 column compared to the left side, so the mean should be on the right side of 4, or larger than 4. So the correct option is larger than 4. By the way, this case is one instance where having a handheld calculator and paper notes by your side is a good thing. You can see that I had to do some mental math there, and if you have those things by your side, there's less of a chance for you to make mistakes. Case 4 is a math case again, but this time we don't need to actually calculate anything, so there's no calculator. Instead, you need to collect necessary numbers into the research journal, which means it is a multiple choice question, but you have to choose all of the multiple correct options, not just one correct option. Because we need to find the formula before we can decide which numbers are relevant, I call this a formula question. And yes, the investigation stage is also a formula question. In the real test, these tend to be less common than their calculation cousins. Now, to answer this particular question, we just need to collect the number of ships captured for year Y-1. No need to collect the data for the remaining years. This is because 1. The question asks for just the additional revenue from the tactical changes alone, not all of the expected growth. 2. This additional revenue is expressed as being 5 percentage points, added on top of the expected growth without the tactical changes, so 5% of the revenue in year Y-1, not 5% of the growth. Which means we just need that year's revenue to figure out how much these tactical changes are worth in 1,000 gold coins. Case 5 also has a formula question, but this time you just need to choose one correct answer. However, like the multiple choice calculation, in these questions the options often look almost identical and almost correct. This case also requires you to change these percentages by a few percentage points each. So unlike question 2 of the analysis stage where we had to multiply, this time we use addition. For example, the share of ships R&D was originally 35% of the original budget. Now they want to decrease it by 6 percentage points. So we just need to add -6 to 35, or a subtraction by 6. If it was a 6% decrease, we would have to multiply 35 with 0.94. Looking at the options, the first and the third ones use multiplications, so they are out. The second one needs parentheses to be correct. That leaves us with the fourth option. The final case is a visualization 1, and while there's no exhibit, you are now asked to choose an exhibit to illustrate a set of data. Usually there's only one visualization case for each Redrock test, plus the graph selection and visualization tasks in the study. For these questions, you must 1. Be familiar with most of the chart types used in data analytics, and 2. Read the directions carefully to find the objective of the analysis and the nuances of the described or given data set. For the first requirement, I'm going to link our guide on chart types in the description. Now let's read these directions. There are 37 types of goods, and they want us to illustrate the shares of tonnage taken up by each type of goods, or to use the technical term composition. Among the options, the bar chart is out immediately because it's not meant for compositions. All the 3 remaining options can display compositions, but the first 2, that is the stacked bar variants, are meant for multiple categories. So if we wanted to illustrate the tonnage composition for many ships at the same time, these are going to work well. But there's just one ship, this brass hind, so we're going to pick the tree map. Then we submit and end this mock test. So, that's all of a Redrock session. In the real test, you will not know if you did your test right or not, except if you captured the test content and tried to do it on paper afterwards. The review screen I have here is just for our simulation, for practicing purposes. Sometimes they have these ending animations, but those will always be happy endings, and that's reasonable. They don't want to, and they should not let candidates be demoralized. And because the Redrock test is the second between the 2 solve tests, the whole solve ends with the Redrock test as well. Okay, so now I'm going to address a few common concerns or issues with this Redrock test, the first of which being time management. Or phrased more accurately, how much time should you allocate for each part in question? If we divide the 35-minute by on average 14 questions, we end up with 2.5 minutes per question. But then we have the need for buffer time, that is, the time reserved to deal with mistakes and unpleasant surprises. My rule of thumb is to set aside at least 20% of the total time limit as buffer time, so now we end up with only 28 minutes, or 2 minutes per question. Next, from the feedback we received at MCP and our own experiments using the simulation, the study has more questions than the cases, about 8 compared to 6, hence the 14-question average. Each study question tends to take longer to complete than their same type counterparts in cases, because they come with more data, have more sub-questions, and the interface is more complicated. So I give each study question a 1.5 weight, compared to 1 for each case question. We run this bit of math here and find out that we should spend roughly 1.56 minutes on each question, meaning 19 minutes for the study and 9 minutes for the cases. That's 28 minutes in total, leaving you with 7 minutes of spare time just in case anything goes wrong, and that's what you should aim for in practice. If you get the 10-case version, the math changes to about 15 minutes for the study, 13 minutes for the cases, with 7 minutes to spare, and that's based on 1.27 minutes per question. I have to stress that the per-part allocation is way more important than the per-question one, because for questions, it's going to vary so much, it doesn't make sense to use that average. Some questions you can answer in literal seconds, while others can take 3 to 4 minutes. Also, feel free to adjust this recommendation during practice. So here's a quick list of items you should get yourself familiar with before entering the Redrock test. I won't deep dive into each topic because it would take too long. Also, the list is definitely not me-see. We start the math stuff, going by the most important ones first. First, getting yourself acquainted with basic algebra terms in English is essential if you're non-native and you grew up not learning math in English. Percent versus percentage point is a perfect example. Some non-English speaking countries have solve available in their native tongues, but not every country has this luxury. You need to absolutely nail it with percentages, fractions, and ratios, because it's going to take up a majority in Redrock. Weighted averages should be on the list. Make sure you understand this really well and get absolutely comfortable with it, because it's in the test of all consulting firms, and in the interview, and in the consulting job as well. Then we have basic statistics, things like mean, mode, and median. I don't think they would go as far as variance and standard deviations, at least for the moment. Finally, still within math, we have probabilities. Probabilities aren't exactly intuitive, but luckily in the Redrock test, there tends to be just one question, maybe two probability questions, and they will be of the most basic levels. The main issue with probabilities is when you have to deal with multiple events or many possible outcomes. So I'm going to recite the three keywords: intersection, union, and complements. And while the terms themselves might sound daunting, you just need a few hours and maybe 10 to 15 good practice questions to get yourself ready. Next, you need to learn how to use exhibits. So you need to know the main types of charts and their use, namely the line and bar charts, their stacked variants, pie charts and tree maps, histogram, scatter plots and bubble charts, Mako charts, etc. Also, that list I just said follows a descending order of priority as well. Finally, you must practice reading, and what I mean here is not just text reading, it's text plus numbers plus exhibits. The two main concerns here are, how do you read a chart or table in a methodical way to avoid being overwhelmed, and then how do you handle large amounts of text effectively? Sometimes I also hear about logic questions in Redrock as well, although I'm not sure how common they are, or if they actually appear at all, because hearing about something is one thing, verifying it is another thing. And then some people would ask me if they need to study business basics for this. I'll answer both questions at the same time. For now, in early 2024, I'd say that dedicated logic and business questions are not yet part of Redrock, but given the prevalence of these contents at other firms' tests, such as BCG and Bain, it's not entirely unreasonable to get yourself somewhat prepared. So when we make the simulation, we do inject a few logic questions in, plus basic business contents. The reasoning here is that you should come in somewhat over-prepared and that you should expect the unexpected. I'll put links in the description to lead you to our articles on the website on each of these topics, in case you want to learn more about them. That said, if you look closely, you can see both of these topics already being tested in Redrock. Logic exists in the form of math. To piece together working math formulas from a bunch of information, that's deductive reasoning. The kinds of math and charts and issues in the Redrock test are closely modeled after the ones involved in the daily job of a project manager, be it in business or engineering. Things like monitoring performance, predicting results, suggesting corrections. Now, project management is not business, but I get a feeling that business-based candidates might get a slight advantage in tests like these. So, do they have logic and business stuff in Redrock? Well, no, but actually yes. You should do about 15 to 20 mock tests, that's the short answer, assuming each mock test roughly covers all the 3-4 question types: calculation, formula, reading, and visualization. The reasoning here is that each question type in Redrock tends to have 3 to 5 main variants depending on how you split them up, and then 3 to 5 sub-variants each. For example, with math, you have basic calculations, percentages, probabilities, weighted averages, and some statistics as well. Then, within probabilities, you have 3 to 5 main subvariants. Same goes for charts, 3 to 5 main chart groups, then 3 to 5 types in each group. You want to get some exposure with each variant at least once. So we run the math, and we end up with a minimum and a maximum on the right here. In reality, there might be fewer subvariants of questions, but some of them are hard enough for you to practice more than once. Before I close out this video, allow me to thank today's sponsor. No, I'm just kidding, we are our own sponsor. You can check out the link and coupon in the descriptions for a 10% off your first purchase of the McKinsey Solve Simulation that we sell on our website. That's all for the Redrock Study Task at the moment. I decided to get the Redrock test out first because even our video from 2 years ago is still accurate for ecosystem building and plant defense even today. That said, in the next video, I'll talk about the ecosystem building. It will be a walkthrough, and it will be in much greater detail than the previous video. I'll have its link in the description once it is uploaded. Thank you very much for your attention, and we at M Consulting Prep wish you the best luck to get into consulting.